What Canadian Rangers found in Baffin Island will haunt you forever. February 1987. Canadian Arctic Rangers discover an entire village frozen in time. Not abandoned, not destroyed, transformed. 217 people. Gone. In their place, perfect ice sculptures depicting their final moments. Each statue anatomically precise, down to the internal organs visible through translucent frozen flesh. This isn't a story about disappearance. This is a story about something that allegedly came during the longest polar night in recorded history. Something local elders call the breathtakers, and what one Canadian military patrol reportedly witnessed that changed Arctic policy forever. What you're about to hear is based on unverified accounts, leaked patrol logs, and testimony from sources who claim to have been there. Whether this represents historical fact or elaborate myth remains unclear. But the documents exist. The witness statements exist. And according to multiple independent sources, the fear in Arctic communities is very, very real. The discovery. Patrol designation Alpha 7 wasn't supposed to be in that sector. According to the leaked operational logs, they were conducting routine sovereignty sweeps along Baffin Island's northeastern coast when their radio equipment began malfunctioning. Sergeant Marcus Whitmore, the patrol leader, reportedly made a different choice. The reports suggest he noticed something unusual on the horizon. Smoke, perhaps. Or the absence of smoke in a settlement that should have shown signs of life. The village had no official name on military maps. Local Inuit communities referred to it as Kauswituk, which allegedly translates to place where the light doesn't reach. Population estimates settled around 217 residents. Fishing community, hunting outpost, isolated even by Arctic standards. When Alpha 7 approached, according to Whitmore's testimony, everything appeared normal at first. Snow-covered buildings, dog sleds arranged near storage structures. Then they noticed the silence. No dogs barking, no generators humming, no smoke from heating stoves despite temperatures reportedly hovering around -40 degrees Celsius. Corporal Jennifer Hallstrom, the unit's medic, was allegedly the first to spot them. The figures. Standing in the village center, arranged in what witnesses described as a gathering formation. From a distance, they looked like people. It wasn't until Alpha 7 got closer that the truth became apparent. They weren't people anymore. The sculptures. Imagine approaching what you think is a crowd, only to realize they're not breathing, not moving, not alive in any conventional sense. According to multiple witness accounts, the figures were composed entirely of ice. But not ordinary ice. This ice was clear, crystalline, structured in ways that shouldn't occur naturally. Each sculpture depicted a person in extraordinary detail, facial expressions frozen mid-emotion, clothing rendered in ice that somehow retained textile patterns, hands positioned as if gesturing, reaching, or recoiling. And most disturbing, according to the reports, you could see inside them. The ice was transparent enough to reveal internal anatomy, hearts suspended in chest cavities, lungs captured mid-breath, blood vessels spreading like frozen rivers through translucent flesh. One figure, reportedly that of an elderly woman, showed what appeared to be a partially digested meal in her stomach cavity. Corporal Hallstrom, drawing on her medical training, allegedly attempted to examine one of the sculptures more closely. According to her statement, the anatomical accuracy was impossible. Every capillary, every muscle fiber, every cellular structure appeared to be perfectly preserved and visible. If I were in that position, I probably wouldn't have made the same choice. Touching something that shouldn't exist seems like the kind of decision fear alone would prevent. Staff Sergeant Thomas Chen reportedly began documenting everything with a standard-issue camera. The photographs, if they exist, have never been officially released. But descriptions paint a consistent picture. Families frozen together, children reaching for parents, adults positioned as if trying to run or hide or fight something invisible. One image allegedly showed a man with his hand outstretched toward the sky, mouth open in what looked like a scream, every tooth visible through ice crystal clarity. The investigation begins. Sergeant Whitmore immediately attempted to radio base command. Within hours, a larger response team was reportedly en route, but Alpha 7 wasn't waiting. They began searching the buildings. The homes were undisturbed, meals sat on tables, partially eaten. Stoves were cold but showed evidence of recent use. Personal belongings remained in place. It was as if every resident had simultaneously stopped what they were doing and walked outside into the polar night. In one home, witnesses reported finding a journal belonging to a woman named Pelusi Kilak. The final entry, dated February 3, 1987, allegedly read, "They're singing again. The children hear it first, always the children. We shouldn't have ignored the elders. The breath is coming." What does that mean? The breath is coming? Lieutenant Rebecca Saunders, who arrived with the response team, reportedly began interviewing the patrol members separately. Their stories matched. Every detail, every observation. She made an unusual request. She wanted to speak with elders from neighboring communities. Specifically, she wanted to know if anything like this had happened before. The answer she received would reshape the entire investigation. The elders speak. In Inuit oral tradition, according to anthropological accounts, there exists a category of beings known as breath-takers. The descriptions vary by region, but certain elements remain consistent. They appear during the longest polar nights. They are drawn to communities that have forgotten old protocols. And they don't kill. They transform. Elder Anana Arnak, from a settlement roughly 150 kilometers south of Kauswituk, allegedly agreed to speak with Lieutenant Saunders. Arnak described events from her grandmother's time, a hunting camp that vanished in the 1920s. 23 people. When searchers found the camp weeks later, they discovered ice formations shaped like human beings. According to compiled oral histories from multiple Arctic communities, similar incidents appear throughout Indigenous testimony. 1897, a whaling station. 1934, a trading post. 1956, a research camp. Each time, people vanished during extended darkness. Each time, ice sculptures remained. The pattern was clear to those who listened. The breath-takers operated according to specific conditions. Polar night darkness exceeding 3 weeks, isolated communities, and most critically, according to Elder Arnak, populations that had stopped performing traditional protective rituals. Personally, this feels like the moment where things started to go wrong. When traditional knowledge gets dismissed, when protocols designed through centuries of observation get abandoned, consequences tend to follow. What were these protective rituals? Arnak described them in detail, though reportedly she refused to explain their full significance to outsiders. Specific offerings placed at cardinal directions, songs sung during the darkest nights, windows marked with symbols, fires maintained in particular patterns. Kauswituk, according to surviving records, had gradually abandoned these practices over the previous decade. Younger generations moved toward modern approaches. Traditional elders passed away without fully transferring knowledge. By 1987, almost none of the protective protocols remained active. If the accounts are accurate, this wasn't random. This was consequence. The technical analysis. Ice samples from the sculptures were allegedly transported to a military research facility in Churchill, Manitoba. The analysis, if reports are genuine, revealed impossible characteristics. The ice wasn't ordinary water-based ice. The molecular structure shouldn't exist at the temperatures and pressures found naturally on Earth. Dr. Raymond Foster, a materials scientist who allegedly examined the samples, reportedly wrote, "The lattice structure resembles Ice 7, a high-pressure crystalline form that typically requires pressures exceeding 3 gigapascals to form. Finding this at atmospheric pressure and Arctic temperatures is thermodynamically impossible." Further analysis allegedly revealed organic material integrated into the ice structure at the molecular level. Human tissue, perfectly preserved, woven into the crystalline matrix in ways that suggested the transformation happened instantaneously. No freezing process. One moment flesh, the next moment ice-preserved flesh. How does that happen? What force could achieve instantaneous molecular restructuring while maintaining perfect anatomical detail? The official explanation attributed the sculptures to a previously unknown natural phenomenon. Rapid atmospheric pressure changes combined with unique meteorological conditions created a flash freezing event. This explanation satisfied bureaucratic requirements, but convinced almost no one who examined the evidence. The pattern emerges. Lieutenant Saunders wasn't satisfied. According to sources, she began compiling historical records from Arctic communities across Canada, Alaska, Greenland, and northern Russia. What she found, if the documentation is genuine, suggested a pattern spanning centuries. Every 8 to 12 years, somewhere in the Arctic Circle, a community would experience a mass disappearance event during polar night. The circumstances remained consistent. Isolated settlement, extended darkness, abandonment of traditional protective practices, discovery of ice sculptures depicting the missing. Between 1880 and 1987, Saunders allegedly documented 23 separate incidents. Whatever was happening didn't discriminate based on culture or nationality. It seemed to respond to conditions and behaviors, not demographics. One case particularly disturbed investigators. In 1964, a Canadian weather station lost contact during a 2-month polar night. When a relief team arrived, they found 7 ice sculptures arranged around the main building. But unlike other incidents, these sculptures were incomplete. Torsos without legs, heads without bodies. The station's logbook contained an entry from the final day. The weather officer wrote, "Heard the singing again. Johnson says we should go outside. Something about joining the choir. I told him that's insane. But I hear it too now. It's beautiful." What choir? What singing? Multiple accounts from survivors mention hearing vocalizations during the darkest periods of polar night. Not human voices, not animal sounds, something else. Harmonics that seem to resonate inside the skull rather than through the ears. To me, this decision feels more emotional than strategic. Going outside during an Arctic polar night in response to mysterious sounds is exactly the kind of choice that logic should prevent. The survivors. 3 incidents reportedly involved survivors. In 1934, a hunter named Nutarok returned to his village to find 31 ice sculptures where his neighbors should have been. In 1978, a bush pilot found everyone transformed except a young girl who had been sleeping in a root cellar. The girl drew pictures, figures reaching toward the sky, mouths open, clouds of breath rising upward, becoming solid. In 1981, a research assistant claimed he survived by hiding in a freezer unit when he heard the singing begin. He watched through a window as his colleagues walked outside, looked up at the sky, exhaled, and turned to ice from the inside out. Each survivor described the same progression. First, unusual sounds during the darkest hours. Second, an overwhelming compulsion to go outside. Third, the transformation itself, which witnesses consistently described as originating from breath. People exhaled, and the vapor didn't dissipate. It crystallized, expanded, enveloped them, restructured them. The breath-takers weren't entities that attacked from outside. If these accounts hold any truth, they were something that responded to exhalation itself during specific conditions. Breathing out became an invitation. The cover-up. By March 1987, according to leaked internal communications, the military response shifted from investigation to containment. The ice sculptures were reportedly transported to a secure facility. The village was declared unsafe due to structural instability. Neighboring communities received official explanations about a carbon monoxide leak. But information leaks. Families demanded answers. Journalists asked questions. Indigenous advocacy groups pushed for transparency. Lieutenant Saunders was reportedly reassigned to administrative duties. Her research files were classified. The patrol members from Alpha 7 were dispersed to different units with strict non-disclosure agreements. The final report on Kauswituk allegedly ran to 847 pages. Only 12 pages were ever declassified. Those pages confirmed that an incident occurred, that casualties resulted, and that the cause remained under investigation. In 1993, a former patrol member reportedly spoke with a documentary filmmaker under anonymity. The interview was never aired, but transcripts allegedly circulated. The patrol member described returning to the site years later as a civilian. The sculptures were gone. The village had been deliberately burned. But local Inuit guides refused to enter the area, even years later. They said the place still carried the breathtaker's mark. The ongoing mystery. If these accounts represent reality, several disturbing questions remain unanswered. What are the breathtakers? Are they entities? Natural processes? Something that exists at the intersection of environment and consciousness? Why the pattern? Why 8 to 12 years? Why only during polar night? Why only isolated communities? The consistency suggests intelligence, or at least a complex responsive mechanism. And most critical, is it still happening? According to unverified reports from Arctic communities, disappearances continue, smaller scale, more carefully concealed, individual cases attributed to natural causes or accidents. In 2003, a Norwegian research team allegedly discovered 2 ice sculptures near Svalbard. The official explanation cited a glacial event, but photographs showed too much detail, too much anatomical precision. In 2011, a Russian mining operation reportedly lost contact with a forward camp during polar night. Workers who entered later reported finding strange ice formations in the sleeping quarters. In 2015, an Alaskan village experienced what authorities described as a mass evacuation due to infrastructure failure. but residents mentioned hearing songs in the darkness and finding partial ice formations. The pattern persists if these reports are credible. The present day. As of this recording, the official position of Canadian authorities remains unchanged. The Cossowituck incident was a tragic accident. The ice sculptures are explained as unusual glacial formations. But if you speak with people who live in Arctic communities, you hear different stories. They talk about protocols maintained across generations, songs sung during the darkest nights, offerings placed at specific locations, windows marked with protective symbols, fires kept burning in traditional patterns. They speak of elders who watch the sky during polar night, looking for signs. They mention children being taught to recognize the wrong kind of silence that precedes danger. They describe a collective memory that official history refuses to acknowledge, and they talk about the missing, people who vanished during darkness and were never found, cases dismissed as accidents, statistics showing unusual spikes in unexplained disappearances during extended polar night periods. Personally, I think this single choice changed everything. The moment authorities decided to suppress rather than study, to deny rather than protect, they left communities vulnerable and abandoned knowledge that might have saved lives. The confession. I said at the beginning that my name is irrelevant. That's partially true. What matters more is that I was there, not at Cossowituck, but at one of the other sites, one of the incidents that never made official records. I was part of a patrol that found ice sculptures where people should have been. I touched them. I saw the anatomical detail. I read the fear frozen into their expressions, and I was told to forget, to sign documents promising silence, to accept explanations that I knew were false. For years, I convinced myself that compliance was necessary, but watching Arctic communities suffer in silence while authorities deny their reality changed my perspective. If this account sounds precise, it's because I kept copies, documents that were supposed to be destroyed, photographs that weren't turned in, testimonies recorded before they were officially sanitized. The risk in sharing this is substantial, but the cost of continued silence feels higher. Because if these accounts represent truth, then communities across the Arctic face a persistent threat that authorities refuse to acknowledge. Traditional protective knowledge gets eroded while official channels provide no alternative. People disappear while bureaucracies file paperwork and issue denials. That's not acceptable. The warning. Whether you interpret this as historical account, speculative narrative, or something in between, certain elements deserve consideration. Indigenous communities across the Arctic maintain knowledge systems developed across centuries of observation. When those communities describe phenomena that seem impossible to outside perspectives, perhaps the limitation lies in our frameworks, not their observations. Extended darkness in polar regions creates conditions unlike anywhere else on Earth. Dismissing unusual events because they don't fit conventional models might represent intellectual failure rather than skeptical rigor. And most critically, the pattern of official denial around Arctic disappearances serves no protective function. It isolates communities, suppresses knowledge, and prevents serious investigation of phenomena that result in real human losses. If you live in or plan to visit Arctic communities during polar night, listen to local wisdom. Respect traditional protocols. Don't assume that modern frameworks supersede accumulated knowledge. And if you hear singing during the darkest hours, if you feel compulsion to go outside despite danger, if you notice silence where sound should exist, trust your instinct for caution. Because whether the breath takers are literal entities, natural processes, or phenomena we lack vocabulary to describe, the transformations are real. The ice sculptures existed, the missing remain missing, and the communities that maintain protective traditions have better survival rates than those that don't. That's not superstition, that's statistical observation. The final question. What happens to consciousness during transformation? The ice sculptures aren't corpses. They're restructured tissue maintaining perfect anatomical detail. Does awareness persist within that frozen state? Do the transformed experience time differently? Or does consciousness cease in the moment breath crystallizes? We don't know. We can't know without examining sculptures that authorities ensure remain inaccessible. But some researchers noted something disturbing. The facial expressions captured in ice weren't all fear or pain. Some showed wonder. Some displayed something approaching ecstasy, as if the final moment before transformation wasn't traumatic, but revelatory. What did they see as they exhaled that final breath? Elder Anana Arnak offered a perspective that investigators found both profound and unsettling. She said the breath takers don't steal life. They offer transformation. And the tragedy isn't the transformation itself, but that it occurs to those who don't understand what's being offered, who can't choose consciously, who become frozen art instead of whatever completion the process intended. If that interpretation holds any truth, then Kausuituk and sites like it aren't crime scenes. They're places where something reached out, offered an exchange, and received involuntary participants instead of willing seekers. That doesn't make the deaths less tragic, but it reframes the question. Instead of asking, what attacked these people, we might need to ask, what invitation did they unknowingly accept? And that question terrifies authorities more than any monster ever could. Because you can fight monsters, you can defend against attacks. But how do you protect people from accepting offers they don't understand? You can't. So you deny, you classify, you suppress. The end? This is where most investigations conclude, with questions instead of answers, with fragments instead of clarity. But for communities living in polar darkness right now, this isn't academic. This is present tense reality managed through knowledge that outsiders dismiss and protocols that authorities won't validate. They maintain the traditions. They sing the songs. They watch for signs. They protect themselves using methods that science can't explain, but that survival rates support. And when someone goes missing during polar night, when ice formations appear where people should be, the official response remains consistent. Natural causes, tragic accident, case closed. But the pattern continues. The sculptures accumulate in classified storage. The witnesses maintain their silence. And somewhere in the Arctic darkness, conditions align again. Isolation, extended night, abandoned protocols. The breath takers don't need to attack. They just wait. And when we exhale into the darkness unprepared, unprotected, unaware, the invitation stands ready. That's not a conclusion. That's a warning. And whether you accept it or dismiss it depends entirely on how much trust you place in official explanations versus the accumulated wisdom of communities that have survived Arctic nights for thousands of years. Choose wisely. The next polar night is always approaching.